Thank you so much for having me. I hope you can hear me. I hope this thing works. I can't tell. Can you tell? Okay, all good. All right. Well, it's a special pleasure for me to be in Corpus because I was an undergraduate here. I spent 4 very happy years here. One of my teachers is here, Stephen Harrison. I just want to express my gratitude to this place and to the people who taught me and to the people who learned with me here. It was a very important and very happy time for me. So it is especially nice to be back for this annual lecture, also for that reason, even though we can't see the trees outside that I enjoyed so much in my years here. And yes, it's true. I did think only half in jest when we were talking, oh, we'll talk on the 1st of May. Maybe I should say Sappho and Marxist reading. And then I chickened out of that ridiculous title. But there is some of it still in this paper. And I would like, however, also to signal my interest and commitment to new materialist ways of thinking for this paper and also more generally. Why do I say more generally? Because I think living with material things and machines is becoming important as a topic of conversation and should be a topic of conversation, I think, also among scholars of the humanities. And if there is one hill on which I am very committed to dying is in the effort to say that scholars of the humanities need to be very, very engaged in what is happening now in transformations of how we use words like intelligence or learning, etc. So 2 aspects of this in particular are important also for this paper, although I could have given a different paper on machine learning and textual criticism, and I will do so in Florence in a couple of days. But for now, 2 things I want to mention at the start. One is, as we all know, that machines now produce language, and I am proud that I am part of a team that tried and succeeded, I think, to show that machine learning can be useful in making diagnostic conjectures on Byzantine texts and other philological contributions. That's at the back. It's a volume that has just come out for Edizioni della Normale, together with Battezzato and Haubold. And the other thing that is happening at the social level is that, for example, chatbots are increasingly preferred to real-life human partners because they are more attentive and say exactly what we want to hear, unlike distracted, long-distance lovers who might have other things to do or say what we're not expecting and so on. So these 2 observations that I'm making at the level of language and, if you like, filling of gaps and philology, and at the level of social networks are, I think, at the back of my mind as I started thinking about Sappho. Because when it comes to Sappho, I think new proposals tend to happen precisely in these 2 ways. On the one hand, a growing interest in female voices and experiences informed by social changes has helped to create a rich polyphonic context within which to place Sappho's lyric I. On the other hand, though, Sappho's own voice now reaches us louder and clearer than ever before because for over a century now, with every decade, we have retrieved more of her words. Newly discovered words are interpreted, of course, in the light of what we already know or what we already think we know about Sappho. But conversely, they represent an opportunity to rethink our frameworks of interpretation. So traffic can go both ways between the social and the philological and back. And of course, there are brilliant moments, as in the, initially the conjecture that fragment 1 was about pursuing another woman that then became a reading later on. There are these moments in which everything comes together, but they don't always do so easy. Now, as for the latest big addition to Sappho's oeuvre, the Brothers' Song, I think there are 2 main reasons why it hasn't really made the impact that I thought it, or that I think it ought to make in our thinking about Sappho's work and her world. The first reason is strictly, I think, ethical, and the second, more broadly, intellectual. I take them in turn in the first part of my paper, and then I move on to make a proposal uneasily divided. So here is like, I'll say something about the materiality of the latest Sappho and material interest in Sappho's latest Sappho, as it were, and then go on to make a proposal divided a little bit between suspicion and utopia, materialist suspicions and materialist utopia. I will use the PowerPoint for images. You have a handout with the main text I discussed put together rather quickly. I'm not going to talk about them in detail, but I thought, I didn't know who would be in the audience, and I thought maybe you wanted to have the points to hand. So the main points that I'm discussing are in the handout. And there's one last final preamble I want to make before I get going, which is that Patrick Finglas, who's here in the audience, is about to bring out a very important, very, very useful, impressive new edition of Sappho and Alcaeus. I have been very lucky because he shared a draft of this with me in summer. I have been reading and learning and taking notes and thinking through issues, but he has shared it with me with a view of my giving feedback to him, not to everybody sort of before it's even out. So for today, I'm going to, with iron self-discipline, I'm going to just go ahead, give this proposal, use Neri's edition, which is already out, and refer as and when to publications that are out already. But since Patrick is here, of course, we can then do more in discussion, and I hope we can do more in discussion with everybody at whatever level of the talk you want to engage with. So here is part one, and here is the brothers' song as a photograph taken from Wikimedia, and in Neri's edition on the handout. The object itself, the actual papyrus, is still unavailable for inspection by the scholarly community, as far as I know. Again, you may know more and you may be able to tell me. But this is a considerable problem, as well, I think, as an opportunity to engage with the materiality of literature and the material impact of immaterial artifacts like songs. Now, it is not in my intention right now to revisit specifically Oxford scandals, and I'm sure that you know more about them than I do. But I do want to start with the ethical problem of how we handle this song as an object, because it sets up my more general argument that I would like to make today, which is materialist. Now, there can be no doubt, I think, that the brothers' song came to light as a result of looting and scholarly malpractice. An interesting fact, though, is that for the first time, I think, in the face of this realization, our field split into two different responses. Some colleagues, while expressing regret at the circumstances of its publication, proceeded to include the song in new editions, translations, articles, and monographs. Others, particularly I think across the Atlantic, broke with this well-established way of operating in the face of unprovenanced papyri and decided not to discuss the brothers' song at all, except to denounce the circumstances of its publication. I'm thinking here, for example, of Theranutus' recent monograph, Greek Poetry in the Age of Ephemerality, or the more tormented take on the whole issue by Melissa Muller in Sappho and Homer, a reparative reading. The argument for not engaging with a song, bluntly put, is that suggesting its importance might add to the monetary value of the object, the papyrus that carries the song. Is this an inflated view of our own importance as scholars? Is it American virtue signaling? I'm not going to engage with this because it's a shady business. Or what is going on? Or is it, as I believe, a reflection of more general shifts in the study of antiquity, away from immaterial notions of literature and indeed philosophy, and towards a stronger commitment to material culture, including non-elite, non-Greek ancient objects, for example, objects made of industrial cartonnage or whatever else. So in general, we've seen the shift. If you pick up any JHS number now and you compare it to 50 years ago, you will see much more on literature 50 years ago than we see now in the titles of the articles. There has also been some speculation, particularly online, that the brothers' song might be a fake. Another reason, of course, to leave it well alone if you're doing a paper on Sappho. But this is, I think, another symptom of a larger cultural shift, in this case, a radical loss of philological expertise, which means, broadly, not by everyone, but on average, which means that the difficulties of forging something like this song can be grossly underestimated by those who suspect it to be fake. Then they don't really know what would be involved in getting away with it. I start then with the brothers' songs because I believe it to be authentic, first of all, and we can go into why I think that, and there are many reasons, but also because I think the papyrus is now in the hands of the police, and so actually talking about it can help finally release it from police custody and have it available to the scholarly community for inspection. And surely, you know, probably should be housed in Egypt, where Roberta Mazza and many others have argued it might have been looted in the aftermath of the Tahrir Square revolution, when a lot of things were looted. There are 2 points, meanwhile, that I would like to emphasize today because about this whole debate. First, our interest, our investment, and dare I say it, even our love for an ancient author can add monetary value to an artifact. Second, unknown provenance is not in itself evidence of forgery. In fact, obviously, one reason why the illegal market in antiquities is so lucrative is that there are many real looted antiquities to be bought and sold. The deeper reason, and this is the reason that interests me today, is the desire to connect physically and materially to antiquity, to possess and hold in our hands something unique and irreplaceable, something priceless in a sense, and yet something that can be bought and sold, and in fact is regularly bought and sold. This desire is felt particularly strongly when it comes to an iconic figure like Sappho. Why? Well, for many reasons, but one reason is that she herself knew how to stir up desire for her songs. How did she do it? Now, this is my kind of Marxist moment. Answers that focus on her artistic merits alone are by definition inadequate, because literary quality and musical skill need to be recognized. In other words, we need to focus on the ancient reception of Sappho's work and not just on our own aesthetic appreciation of it. This Kalpis, dated to around 510 BCE, represents our earliest material evidence of Sappho's fame and impact in antiquity, and in fact far from her native island, within some 50 or 60 years of her death. And this is a remarkable thing in itself. Unfortunately, in this case of this vase too, we have no record of provenance. What we do know is that in some pottery workshop in or near Athens, a semi-literate painter bothered to spell out Sappho's name next to her music-making hands. And I say semi-literate because we have other vases by the same painter, and he does sometimes use letters, but he scatters them at random to suggest the idea of language without bothering to form actual words. Of the extant work, this is the only case in which he chooses, he bothers to pick the right symbols to spell out Sappho's name. And just as his work suggests, her name spread primarily through her music making. And within her songs, she appears as a figure of remarkable attractiveness and refinement, again exactly in line with this depiction, where she holds the barbitos, the concert instrument of antiquity, the Steinway of lyres, as it were. So this piece of material evidence provides an initial answer to my question about desire. Sappho's songs create an authorial persona that clearly made an impact far from her native Lesbos. The figure depicted here need not tell us how her songs were actually performed or even how and by whom they were composed, but it is evidence for how they were received. And I realize this is a very kind of Graziosi point but the author is the product of the oeuvre as it is encountered by audiences and readers. A broader answer to my question of desire needs to take into account the likely context of performance for Sappho's work. A dominant scholarly model of interpretation here is still based on Claude Calam's work on the chorus of girls. And that work, in turn, is primarily based not on Sappho, but on Alcman. Now, I am happy to agree with Calam, and indeed probably everybody else in this room, that the Parthenaia, that Alcman's Parthenaia do offer, in many ways, the closest parallels to Sappho's work. In both authors, we encounter girls who express attraction for one another. We hear of interest in the same luxury goods even, such as Lydian headbands that feature in both. And we are more generally treated to careful assessments of female beauty and musical accomplishments. It is on the basis of these similarities that the chorus of girls emerged as an institution that best explains the context of performance for Sappho's songs. But it seems to me that the differences between Alcman and Sappho have not perhaps been sufficiently emphasized in this quest for the context. Let me try to summarize how I see them. First of all, Alcman places the chorus of girls in the here and now of performance. Here comes Hagezikura. Agido brings down the sun to shine on us. In short, the chorus comment on dance moves as they happen in real time before the eyes of the audience. Our overwhelming impression, therefore, when we read Alcman today, and I don't know how many of you tried, I've tried many times, I've taught it, etc., is that his Parthenaia would finally start to make some sense if only we were in the audience in early Sparta and could see what was going on. That way, and frankly only that way, we could finally work out, for example, whether the Pleiades mentioned in fragment 1 are actual stars, or a rival chorus, or doves, or a ritual title for two specific girls, all of which hypotheses have been put forward in scholarship, with various arguments and various degree of convictions, but no ultimate certainty and no hope of it, given our loss of context. And here I might quote Felix Budelmann, excellent commentary on Alcman and Greek lyric more generally, the green and yellow. He says, in Alcman, references and appeals to realities before the audience's eyes are frequent. Sappho also appeals to our eyes, but in ways that make us see what is not there, such as, for example, the lovely walk and sparkly face of Anactoria, to quote fragment 16, who is not there. We are told exactly what, moreover, and this is also interesting, her songs present rapidly evolving situations which are nevertheless fully intelligible. We don't have any of these debates. What are the Pleiades? What's going on now? I don't understand what's going on. No, we understand exactly what's going on. We're told exactly what we need to know in order to understand the situation at hand. This thought puts me in mind of Anactoria, who is not here, and I'd rather see her than all the armies of Lydia. Or again, if I look at you, even just for a moment, just as you flirt with that godlike man, this is what I feel. The situation is exactly intelligible. We can see the couple, we can experience what Sappho is going through. There is nothing uncertain about what is going on. But in this case, what is being described inside the song cannot refer to realities before the audience's eyes, to quote Budelmann on Alcman once again. Not even the realities in front of Sappho's eyes at the moment of performance. Anactoria is not here, and surely Sappho is not actually performing fragment 31 while having a seizure. There's some kind of separation here. The fact that we cannot be there emphasizes Sappho's capacity for energeia, poetic vividness, which especially in fragment 16 is presented as a remedy for absence. We see Anactoria because there is song, because there is poetry, and for no other reason, because she's not there. For Calam, the function of Alcman's Parthenaia, and by extension Sappho's songs, is the initiation of young women into society. And he is quite single-minded in pursuit of this idea. Current scholarship, my own included, still essentially accepts his analysis. In her monumental recent monograph, Choral Constructions, for example, Debbie Steiner pays greater attention than Kalam to the materials that go into the making of the chorus, and yet she too works with the model he established. I quote, choral morphology understood as including the makeup of the chorus, the relations between its members, and the configurations in which it dances is a constant in her work. And it comes from Kalam directly, as she acknowledges. One of the very few scholars who remarks on the surprising absence of this choral morphology in Sappho is Giambattista D'Alessio. He expresses the point in characteristically technical terms, but essentially chimes with the observation I have just made about the differences between Altmann and Sappho. The Brothers song helps to underscore those observations, not just because there is no girl chorus in sight, and in fact the social network in this poem is clearly that of the family, rather than the same-sex peer group, but because the song helps us focus on some features which I think characterize Sappho's work generally, but have not been allowed to shape fundamentally our framework of interpretation. The fragment, as we have it, opens with someone chattering about a ship that is about to materialize, full of precious cargo, while Sappho insists that such boasting is premature and that the addressee should rather send Sappho to the temple of Hera to pray for a safe voyage for Charaxus, her older brother, or a swift process of growing up for Larichus, a younger one. So, within a few lines, we are drawn into a complex situation marked by high stress and conflicting views about what to do. We hear how Sappho tells her addressee what the addressee should be telling her in a dynamic which, as many have observed, fits, which, as many have said, fits a mother-daughter relationship, I can say from my own experience, particularly at a time when authority is shifting from one generation to the next. I don't know if you've ever told your mother, you should be telling me this, not that, right? This is what we have in the poem, assuming the addressee is Sappho's mother. These rapid dynamic shifts characterize Sappho's work more generally, I think. In the Ode to Aphrodite, the most famous, fragment 1, Sappho similarly depicts a situation of crisis. Do not break me with hard pain, she says. And then she reminds Aphrodite what the goddess often told her in the past, hoping for a similar response this time also. Please tell me this also right now. In fragment 31, Sappho is again at breaking point, as we know, declaring herself dead or almost. And yet we have a sense that here too that better weather, as it were, might follow, that there is a need to go to do the right thing despite the pain. Everything has to be endured, or everything has to be dead, or something in between. Pantolmaton. The poem ends, this is in your, or what we have of the poem ends, fragment, handout 2, because even a poor man ... Now, so reflections about material wealth are harnessed to make a point about getting hold of oneself. In short, both erotic distress and financial anxiety are addressed in Sappho by taking the long view about the past and the future, and by emphasizing the importance of responding appropriately in the present by keeping that larger context in mind. The songs are vivid, yes, immediate. They make us feel as if we are right there with Sappho at the moment of crisis. Yet also establish broader vistas and a sense that the past and the future can support the present crisis. If we ask ourselves in what capacity we are right there with Sappho, we must conclude that we are flies on the wall, or in the case of fragment 168b, bedbugs in the mattress, maybe, while Sappho or pseudo-Sappho sleeps alone. She's alone, but we're hearing, right? In the brother song, while ostensibly talking privately, Sappho is, of course, broadcasting what, in her view, should happen next. Indeed, she draws attention to her authority by correcting her mother's own public utterances. In short, we are given access to an intimate exchange, and yet we are also informed about the public standing and wealth of Sappho's family and their shipping business, as long as her brothers come good and do what she prays they will. This is what Peponi calls Sappho's Metapoetics of the domestic. Mention of the temple of Hera is associated with the specific ritual action, a prayer for Charaxus' safe homecoming. But, as D'Alessio points out, the song we are hearing is not itself that prayer. Which lies just beyond the framework of our song. The exchange between Sappho and Graziosi is instead all about choices made from a subaltern position. Here comes my Marxist terminology again. Whether Charaxus' ship sinks or sails is, as Sappho points out, not something she or her mother can control. It depends on his navigation skills, presumably, but more importantly, on what the gods ordain. Nevertheless, even from a position of utter dependence on the whim of male relatives and fickle gods, it is possible to make better or worse choices about what to do. Chattering about the imminent arrival of a splendid cargo and thereby surely tempting fate is one way to go. Offering a proper prayer in the temple of Hera is quite another. Ritual action, then, is something important and something women can do, but lies beyond our song, which is giving us a behind-the-scene glimpse of what exchanges need to take place between women in order to ensure the men move safely and in the right direction, and with some speed. To reinforce the idea of choice, Sappho adds a final twist, which is also, I think, more broadly characteristic of her work, but I'm not sure has been picked up very much. Should things not turn out as hoped, it is always a good idea to have a plan B. This is what I say to myself, to anyone who will listen also. Charaxus may or may not come back, but there is also Laricus, and if he finally manages to grow up or stand tall, then that would also provide a solution to the current impasse. So here are the main features of the brothers' song that I have tried to summarize. But meanwhile, I will also give you my own plan B in case this song fails or the papyrus fails to materialize or otherwise is revealed as a mirage, a product of our own desires, whether for Sappho or for wealth. My argument, I think, would still stand, and it can be made on the strength of many other fragments too. I give you on your handout under 398, which is a good example for a good parallel to the brothers' songs. In this song too, Sappho addresses a relative, in this case her daughter Clays, and insists she cannot give her a Lydian headband because trade has been disrupted, the Cleanctids are in exile, and a Mytilenean man is somehow responsible for the situation. In short, there is no Lydian headband to be had. While acknowledging all these difficulties, Sappho characteristically outlines her plan B. She who bore me, she says, so Sappho's mother and Clay's grandmother, used to say that a purple ribbon suits dark hair, while a wreath of flowers looks lovely against blonde tresses. In short, there are viable alternatives to a Lydian headband, and there is a family tradition that can be mobilized to solve the immediate difficulties at hand. Broader vistas and therefore stability. As for the plan B suggested, we know which solution Clay should go for because, as Teplari points out in a different song, your handout 4, we are told that Clay has hair like golden flowers and that Sappho would rather keep her than have all the riches of Lydia or Lobby, something like that. So the fragment, this number 4, helps my argument in two ways. First of all, it shows how we can link one song to the next, building up a whole world. No matter in what order we actually hear the songs, we can rearrange them in our own head, just like when we hear the Archers after a gap, which I've just done because I've just been back in Britain, or we hear it out of sequence. So, you know, Ambridge, like Lesbos, this is what I want to suggest here. We know what goes on there. We kind of know about all these different relationships, how they develop and how, what, you know, what is happening with recurrent names and new entrances and people who come back and then say something else. In fragment 98, Sappho's mother is dead. In fragment 10, she's still young enough that she ought to be bossing around her daughter. In fragment 132, Claes has hair like flowers. In fragment 98, actual flowers rather than a Lydian headband should be used to adorn her hair. Loveliness is expressed in decidedly material terms, and yet Claes turns out to be irreplaceable, unique, priceless, something that will not be swapped for the whole of Lydia. Just so, in fragment 49, handout 5, the singer describes her affection for Attis, even at a time when she did not seem to her, let's say, promising material, to use an unfortunate pedagogical metaphor that has been used many times. So what am I trying to say here? Skill, grace, and wealth are important in this world, but Sappho insists that love comes first and cannot be reduced to skill, grace, or money. How then do we approach the issue of value in Sappho's songs and the value of Sappho's songs? Now, here, old school suspicious Marxism offers one possible approach with its blunt distinction between base, that is to say the economic system, the means of production, and superstructure, that is to say culture, religion, literature, songs, everything that supports the base. We may start then by observing that in Antiquity, Lesbos was famous for its women, its wine, and its song culture. When in Iliad 9, your handout 6, Agamemnon tries to pacify Achilles, he offers to return Briseis. He says, have my own daughter in marriage if you'd like. And then he says, and I'll add 7 more women on top, and not just any women, the best kind women from Lesbos. Note lesbidas in emphatic position. And we are also told, winner in beauty over the tribes of females. Ancient commentators got very interested in the 7 women from Lesbos, and after delving into the matter, concluded that they were the former winners in a beauty contest held annually on Lesbos, a kind of ancient Miss Aegean, your handout 7. The same information features in other late sources, and more importantly, tallies with the song by Alcaeus 8, from which it may ultimately derive. And now in the song, and this interests me in terms of positionality, Alcaeus is skulking in the countryside, observing from the sidelines, overhearing, eavesdropping, peeping in, as it were, what goes on in the precinct of Hera. And he describes it as the gods of Lesbos being judged for beauty, going to and fro with trailing robes as the divine sound of the women's annual, at the divine sound of the annual holy cry of the women. Following the Scholia, many have argued that Homer and Alcaeus referred to the same beauty context, although there's some knowledge there also in the Iliad, and moreover assume that Sappho must have been centrally involved in it, particularly since she too mentions the precinct in fragment 17, where she says that the festival is celebrated now in accordance with ancient precedent, and the ancient precedent is that of the Atreidae, who, as we know also from the Odyssey, stopped in Lesbos before sailing across from Euboea from Troy to Euboea with Helen, eventually making it home with the ultimate traveling bride, Helen. We do not need Sappho then to know that the women of Lesbos are especially desirable. Homer and Alcaeus are sufficient for that. And Anacreon adds an interesting detail, in this case surely also in response to Sappho. For the most straightforward reading of your passage 10 lets us know that these glamorous women from Lesbos are liable to fall in love with one another. The word Allen is surely most easily taken to mean another girl, even though there's an enormous amount of scholarship, all by male authors, I should say, that understands Allen as meaning other hair, and therefore the non-white hair of someone other younger than Anacreon, or the pubic hair belonging to Anacreon himself, i.e. a reference to Calatio. for which lesbian women were known. And the comic playwright Pherecrides, I should say, reworks Iliad 9, that passage, promising that the 7 women from Lesbos will deliver just that. My point here is that male and more specifically phallocentric interpretations acquire extra point, as it were, if they are heard as alternatives to the more obvious reading. The performance would then imply the displacement of a girl together with her replacement by a man or a specific part of his anatomy. Anacreon then assumes knowledge of Sappho's poems and of the love affairs between women they describe. At the same time, he points to Homer and the supremacy of Lesbos when it comes to attractive women. Whether they are commodity goods in the sex trade is a question that has long been on the table. Anacreon's poem allows for that possibility while claiming that the girl has the power to reject unwanted attention on the basis of desires and interests of her own. As Budelman puts it, if this is prostitution, it is of a more upmarket kind. High-class courtesans were often presented as bestowing their favors as a gift rather than as part of a purely economic transaction, whatever the underlying realities of the situation. So we arrive, I think, at the idea that a lesbian woman, understood here as a luxury good and a material object of trade, increases her own value by expressing sexual desires of her own. The so-called Trennungsgedichte, separation poems, seem especially important in relation to this idea because they express erotic desire, but safely impossible desire, or at least impossible from this moment of separation onwards. This vase confirms that separation was an important theme in Sappho's work, again matching very closely what we see in the extant fragments. And, you know, we have 5% of Sappho, so we have a lot of separation poems, but it could be a fluke, but then this vase also kind of riffs on that topic. And here we see it very clearly. Desire goes one way, physical bodies quite another. The feet one way, the looks the other way. This is the situation in fragment 98, for example, handout 11, where we learn that one woman is now in Sardis, but often turns her thought in this direction because she enjoys your song above all. And this you seems to refer to Attis, whom we've already encountered. If the poem continues after line 20, as I argue, but is contested, and we can discuss this more, then it seems that Attis might be about to leave Lesbos perhaps for Euboea, where Geraistion in line 33 is located, and that Sappho takes the opportunity to remind her that somebody who has already left Lesbos now is in Lydia, in Sardis, but still thinks about the song that this woman who's also about to leave for somewhere else used to perform. Or again, consider fragment 94, your handout 12. Memory of past happiness is presented here as a reason for resilience in the present. Usual thing, moment of crisis, think of the past, project into the future, get over it, kind of thing. Certainly for the girls, and depending on who the speaker in line 1 is, quite possibly for Sappho herself. I'm quite committed to the first line being Sappho saying, I wish I was dead. And I don't think it's a contradiction. I do this with my own kids. Yes, yes, go, bye-bye, no problem, go to university. Afterwards, right? But you put a brave face, but then you also suffer, and the consolation that you give is also a consolation to yourself afterwards. Yes, they should go, they should make their way. In short, then it looks like men decide where women end up, yet women have desires of their own, and song helps keep in touch with those desires while adapting to a plan B. Kairosa ergeo, go rejoicing, because you have been loved, because you have had pleasure, because we did not hold back from anything in the past, and therefore you can be loved and you can have pleasure in future too. And you are someone who knows already how not to hold back. And a woman who rejoices is in turn a great joy. Here then is my suspicious reading. The networks binding people, objects, and people as objects within and around Sappho's poems help to explain the specific model of authorship that governs her work. We have already seen that Lesbos was famous for the beauty of its women and its songs. So what Sappho does is that she allows her audiences to glimpse and eavesdrop on what goes on in the making of these glamorous musical lesbian women. This, I suggest, increases their value, not least as export goods. It also increases Sappho's own value as an author of and for the women in question. She can place them, this one is in Sardis, someone else is about to leave for Boraistia, name them and suggest how they relate to her and to each other across vast distances. Because they're musical and because they feature in her music, they are desirable. As for Sappho herself, she is likewise musical and she likewise features in her own music. Her persona, in other words, builds on and in turn reinforces the reputation of Lesbos for its women and its songs, not just at home, but overseas. It also offers a model, my suspicious reading, for how familiar networks and not just peer groups benefit from women who know what to do and what song to perform when. And that is what the Brothers' song clearly illustrates. Whether the girls who cross the sea are exported as wives or as courtesans is a question that I've already raised and might ultimately depend on perspective. Renate Schlesier has tried very hard to establish that prostitution was very precisely the profession exercised by Sappho and several girls named in her poems. A hard version of that position is perhaps difficult to square with the wedding songs attributed to Sappho in Antiquity. I don't know now cross-culturally of many situations where prostitutes are put in charge of wedding rituals. So that's one thing. But if we do not posit a sharp dichotomy between wives and high-class courtesans, assuming that whatever the nomenclature adopted, these women crossed the sea and were placed in strategic positions, and were then useful in establishing and maintaining social networks and trade networks too, then various scenarios become easier to envisage. A papyrus containing the biography of Sappho claims that Charaxus, her annoying older brother, sailed to Egypt and associated with one Dorica, spreading large sums of them on her, as the papyrus puts it. 3 extant fragments of Sappho seem to refer to this episode, and one suggests that Sappho was far from pleased about her brother's affair. Just like Sappho's mother in the Brothers' song, in your passage 13, Dorica too seems prone to boasting, and in this case too, Sappho is keen to correct her account. According to some late sources, Charaxus bought the freedom of this Dorica, who was working as a prostitute in Egypt, took her to Lesbos, married her, and had children. According to other sources, he eventually returned to Mytilene alone, upon which Sappho violently railed against him and against the woman for fleecing him. Perhaps, as fragment 15 in fact suggests, Charaxus went to Egypt twice. Men came and went with ships full of cargoes. Women sailed across the sea once only, except if you're Helen. Then they stayed in place, but connections were performed and reperformed in song. How satisfying is this proposal? Does it shatter feminist and more specifically lesbian utopias by suggesting that desire between women safely in the past and across the sea can add to the value as wives and or courtesans who know who is where and who is trading what with whom and what to do if the ship is late in materializing, and why Lydian headbands are not materializing, and what to do with hair arrangements in their absence, etc. Does the sense of something beautiful happening in Lesbos between women diminish if we think that the songs create that beauty largely as an export good? So it is perhaps time that I bid farewell to Marx as a master of suspicion, and offer a different version of materialist thinking that aims to expand and liberate consciousness, which after all was always what Marxism was supposed to do, for example, via the utopian imagination. More specifically, it may be useful to engage with Latour's actor network theory in order to reassemble the social, to quote his title. Assuming my model accounts for the reach of Sappho's poetry across the sea and from early on, the meaning of that poetry need not be constrained by its functions. As Rose argues, ancient poetry allows readers to imagine what might be possible in future. On the basis of what did and also what did not happen in the past. And of course, you know, Sappho is one of the very few names that names an entire way of life, lesbian, sapphic. I mean, together with Pollyanna and maybe Queen Victoria, these are the only three women I could think of, right? In fragment 94, as we have already seen, she insists that Graziosi should go rejoicing, Kairosa ergio, on the strength of all the good things that happened to her in the past. That idea may also help us deal with a fragment that has long been marked by daggers, either dismissed as corrupt beyond emendation, or most recently amended by Benelli under the influence of what I consider an easier reading in the Scholia to Aratus. And so tentatively, the suggestion here is that maybe, just maybe, fragment 117 needs no emendation. And this is a suggestion that I discussed with my dear friend and colleague, Lucia Prauscello, and I would like to acknowledge that, you know, that pleasure of discussion, if nothing else. So Hephaestion quotes the line to illustrate a point of meter, and the line doesn't, in fact, scan as he would like if we have a nominative short alpha, kairos and nympha, the rejoicing bride. This, however, makes the grammar very difficult, or indeed impossible, if we insist on placing the bride and the bridegroom on an equal level. If, however, we place the rejoicing bride as the subject in the subject position and treat the bridegroom as a parenthetic aside before continuing in the next line to train our attention on her, then we might be able to make sense of the text as transmitted in Hephaestion. As in fragment 94.7, there might be an insistence here too that the happiness of the bride matters, kairosa ergeo. Or, as in fragment 44, we may see the bride arrive with many gifts, she herself, like the young Andromache, being the greatest gift of all. What then about the question of value, the value of literature, the value of song, and the value of women in the song, Sappho included? I have given a fully suspicious answer to that question, but here at the end, I would like to sit with my utopian, my own utopian, unlikely, maybe impossible reading of fragment 117, placing the rejoicing woman in the subject position. And it must be said that men in Sappho's song are simultaneously powerful and parenthetic. The focus, the subject position, is held by women. Sappho passes the Bechdel test to women talking to one another about something other than a man quite easily, no problem. The focus, the subject position, then, is held by women. And this emerges with special clarity in the Brothers' song, where almost everything depends on men and the gods. Yet the focus is on the interactions between women and the importance of choice and therefore agency and therefore acting responsibly, even within very severe constraints. You can live crying, but you can also live rejoicing. If you do the latter, you add value to yourself. Sappho offers her own persona to illustrate the point, to enact the choice, even in situations of high anxiety and almost total breakdown. She makes herself into an example then, but she is also made by others in reception, as I insisted at the start. I end then on a point that might prove relevant not only to Sappho, her work, but our own work, our own worlds, as machines produce facile, frankly, texts, and some people prefer them to real human communication. In the novel Clara and the Sun of 2021, Ishiguro puzzles over the difference between a real girl, Josie, and a pure commodity, her artificial friend named Clara. The creator of Synthetic Companions, Mr. Capaldi, Italians creating artifacts yet again, believes there is no difference at all between real and artificial girls. It is Clara, the robot, the pure commodity, who points out his mistake. Mr. Capaldi believed there was nothing special inside Josie that could not be continued. He told the mother he'd searched and searched and found nothing like that. But I believe now he was searching in the wrong place. There was something very special, but it wasn't inside Josie. It was inside those who loved her. Just so, Sappho is special because she created far-reaching networks of affection. But we should also remember that those networks, in turn, created her, the author within the song. Thank you.